So welcome to class, everybody. It's week 2 about user experience, wireframing, and the Scrum process. Keep in mind this lecture is being recorded for viewing later on. I actually remembered this time, so we're good to go from the start. This week, like I said, UX, wireframing, and Scrum. Next week, we're going to get into the first career module, talking about online profiles and resumes. Then week 4, we'll get to live coding and project review. And then after the 2 break weeks, we're going to get into just live coding. So live coding is the biggest piece of our interview process. It's where you actually stand in front of a whiteboard, write out a bunch of code, and say, hey, I know how to solve these problems without using without using a development environment to help me. So it's a big deal. It's a lot of problem. A lot of people have problems with it, so we spend a lot of time on it. So we'll be getting there soon. Make sure you're doing the hacker rank programs that we give you at the end of every class, because they do help. To note, don't have to come back to the lecture meeting at 9 o'clock. You're free to go after mentor dismisses you. Just make sure you get that hacker rank problem from them before you go. So for this class, if you have it handy, you'll need some pencils, markers, and paper. A couple of post-it notes maybe, and of course your completed prep work. And the roles related to the stuff we are discussing in this class are front-end developer, user experience designer, user experience testing, user interface designer, graphic design, and content writer. This is the art class, for those of you that are loving that side of things. I did want to cover something that we talked a little bit about in open forum. Come back to, so everybody hears the explanation of how a feature and a story are related to each other. So as I kind of mentioned earlier on during open forum, a user story really puts the value of what a user needs front and center. So we're saying actively, we're going to think about who's using the site when we build a user story. But how those user stories relate back to the features is kind of a little bit of a different thing, because we're saying we want the user to have access to this when we have a feature set up. Then with the individual stories, it's like these are the pieces of that feature all together. So the way to think about it is, if I hand you 2 pieces of paper, and one has this one gray block on the left, and one has the kind of all 9 of those little blocks, which would you rather do? Most people would probably hopefully go after that one of the 9 blocks, even though they're really kind of the same size. Those 9 blocks represent the user stories that comprise that feature. So the idea is that by breaking the task down smaller, we're able to be a little bit more accurate about what we're trying to do, a little more careful about the individual pieces of that, and then they come together nicely into one big whole item. So I just want to make sure I got that across to you guys. I kind of blew over that really fast inside of the and recording didn't start. There it goes. Okay. Wanted to make sure I went over that with you guys, just because I seem to have glossed over that piece during class last week. So first things first, we're going to talk about user experience. This is a concept that relates to how users actually experience your site. The sort of thing we're actually going to get into to talk about how to build that is called wireframing, sort of outlining your site. And so we're going to talk really quick about some concepts and ideas, nothing too in-depth, because this is, 1, not my field, and 2, it's an entire field unto itself, so I can only do so much in about 20 minutes. So user experience, user interface are 2 fields that are very different but extremely related, because they are touching the same pieces. So I love this explanation of how a UI and UX relate. So you can imagine parents on the left, they're the user interface. They are seeing those cute little animals spinning around, all of that, but the actual user of the mobile, who's the baby, is seeing, animal butts. It's a little crass, but it is the point. You can have this gorgeous thing that looks great to you guys, but your actual users may see it and go, oh my gosh, this is horrible. It's like looking at butts. And it's purely because you know what's going on. In writing and all of these things, technical writing, we talk about, I know that you know what I know that you know that I know that you know. It's a really complicated sentence. It's a really complicated sentence that boils down to, I can't assume that you know what I want you to do. So I need to make sure that you know what you need to do prior to me, or prior to getting onto my site with any guidance that I can give you on my site. It's a really weird way of saying it, but that's kind of the gist of user experience, is think about what the user is doing, not what the user is looking at. So Reason for this, on the internet, the average for site abandonment, which is somebody leaves your site, is about 15 seconds. So if I jump onto a page, I look at it, and you've probably done it yourself. I look at it, I don't see the stuff I need or what I'm looking for right away. I'm on to the next site because I get 3 million Google reviews. So users decide fast, so you build your layout with that content in mind. You're going to give them the function and what they need over anything razzle-dazzly or special about it. So if you ask me, I'm always going to tell you put the link up before you put a crazy animation of that link kind of swooping in from the side. So that's the primary thing, is make sure you've got your function going before anything that makes it pretty. Mentioned 15 seconds. People do this crazy thing with their eyes. If you ever get into any user experience, user design testing, you're going to do a thing called an eye tracking study. So they'll set up a screen that actually tracks the motion of the user's eyes when they look at your website, and then kind of see where they go, and then compare that across all of your testing users. And then say, hey, we have hotspots here, here, and here on the page, and that's where our content needs to be. And sort of the average path looks like this pointer eyes tracking study side, where they fly across, up, down, up, left, right, and around, and then finally over to this far side of the page. If you take a bunch of people over once, you're going to see a pattern emerge that's called the golden triangle. The golden triangle is that very top left corner of your page. If you look at a lot of websites, that's where their logo is, and always a click to go back to the front page. And then the way that the content is laid out sort of follows this, first chunk branch structure, where you kind of have your best content up front, your most relevant or newest, depending on what the point of your site is. So like, a news site, you always have your most recent news up here at the top, and then above that you have breaking news if something really big is happening. So that's kind of the gist of it, is put your important stuff up top and then more specific as you go down. Again, writing is always fun. In journalism, we use a concept called the inverted triangle, where you put your most general stuff in the top, so that anybody reading gets the big ideas of whatever happened, and then you get more specific as the article goes on, so that if you get to where you're broken onto a separate page, you get below the fold, you've gotten the big points of that story across, and everyone feels important no matter where they stopped reading. I summarize all of what I feel about it basically from this book called Don't Make Me Think, A Common Sense Approach to Web Usability by Steve Krug. This does everything I just said in a way easier way to remember. A way easier way to remember. So what's the most important thing I should do if I want my site to make sure that it's easy to use? The answer is simple. It's not. Nothing important should be ever over 2 clicks away. It's not speak the user's language or be consistent. It's don't make me think. Being that you only have a limited time to get the person's attention, you want to make sure that they're engaged with your content from the moment they land on your site. So don't make them think about getting the content. This is fast. This is a lot going on in one site, or one quick set of slides to explain an entire field of work. I'm going to show you a site that I love, that I work for, called eTrailer.com. And the reason I'm going to show you guys this is that they are very, very good, and I really enjoy how they have their site laid out. So let me get the correct tab here. So this is a site. eTrailer is, for reference sake, the largest manufacturer or largest distributor and now manufacturer of custom fit trailer parts. Basically, they sell trailer hitches, they sell things for towing cars, they sell bike racks, they sell roof racks, they sell all of these different things that people use to make their giant lifted trucks look good. They also sell for little tiny cars like mine. So I have a Honda Civic, and I'm looking at a Jeep Gladiator right now. So that's anything you need to call something, that's what this site does. So in their actual layout, you can see right up here, this is actually the link to loop back to their homepage. And in that first kind of triangle, you actually have their biggest seller. And what everybody comes to the site for to begin with is the actual towing pieces. So when you mouse over, each of these breaks out into the individual under subcategories. So for towing, you have your actual hitches, towing components, enhancement, tow bars, hitch accessories. Those are the top 5 categories. Those are the things people see first. In the first place they move their mouse, it comes up with that stuff. So this is taking advantage of that kind of triangle up here at the top of the page that says, this is where my focus is initially. As you go over, you get into less and less popular categories, but it is the stuff they still carry and sell. When I worked here, I actually worked in sports and rec, so bike racks, accessories, water sports. They sell pontoon kayaks now, which is kind of crazy to me. I'd love to be in the warehouse at that point. It goes on and so on and so forth through less and less popular, less and less selling items until you get to ingest their brands and then their clearance stuff. Other thing about this to notice is that right up here in the top, their focus up here is if you need help. If you're looking for your order, which are two functions that are used a lot on e-commerce sites, they're just right here, immediately available to whoever needs, or to anybody that needs it. So you just slap in your order number, postal code, everything straightforward, easy. I'm not thinking about where to get this stuff. I just hit it. There it is. No jumping through hoops, no landing on an FAQ page where it's a separate link anchored down because it looks better. Nothing like that. It's just there. So they continue this through. So if you notice up here, it says my vehicle. I have my Gladiator that I really want popped in here. So this actually, what it does is when I enter that vehicle type, it automatically filters the entire site down to just stuff that's compatible with my specific year, make, and model of car. So now I'm not thinking about, does this fit, does it not? I just know it's there. So I just have my items. I can click into the trailer hitch. I can see right up here at the top, I come to what style do I have. So I don't want to go to the con package. So I have my one trailer hitch. I know this fits. I know exactly what it looks like, who it's made by, what size it is, its capacity, all of the information's might be something in my feed. That's a good point. Let me change my mic real quick for you guys.
No, is that better? Okay, I bet I was picking up my fan. I'm trying not to burn to death. Sorry, guys.
Oh, I thought it was the rain.
Yeah, it's that too. So I apologize, guys. I didn't mean to drown myself out, which is really hard to do. I'm impressed I did it. Anyway, starting over, it's just everything is filtered down to what I need from the site. There's no thinking about, am I the right part? Am I the right car? It's just given me the things I need to see for what I have without having to think about it. They kind of repeat this trick through the site, and I'm just foreshowing because a lot of people are going to have item pages. You know, you have your picture. It's actually a 3D model of it. You have your title, customer reviews. Everything links to its relevant information. There's no information that's not relevant, and there's no wasted space. So simple, to the point. It's part of what's made the site so successful, is because there's no thinking about, do I have the right part? I know, and worst comes to worst, you can actually just jump down here. They have a Q&A tab. You can actually see them answering questions from other people and ask a question yourself. And I love this website because of that design, that it's just, this is what we have, this is what you need, this is what fits, end of story. And they do that through good user experience and good user interface design of just presenting everything up front with no wiggle room of, have I picked the wrong thing? So that's a lot. I know I'm also kind of an advertisement for them. Happens. Did really enjoy working for them. They're run by some very, very good people. So I try and shout out to them whenever, but they also have good, solid web design, and that's why I like them. So before I fly off into anything else, I know I was crispy for a while there. Anybody have any questions, or do I need to go back and repeat anything for anybody prior to moving on to our next topic? Okay. All right, so we're going to get into building a wireframe. So I'm showing you guys an example of good UI because you're going to design your own UI tonight. Simple as that. And so what we're going to do with the wireframe is call out our individual pieces of our pages in a method that makes sense. There isn't really no standard. I could show you all of these unique tools and all of that, but we don't need any extra tools at this point because we're focusing on getting this thing that we're trying to get done. So I recommend use pencil and paper. So I'm going to walk through one of these, but what you're going to do during the wireframe is call out your specific content and functionality you need. Don't have to like write, you know, this is my horse, and then this is the name of the horse and all that. You just have to put out just where that's going. If it's something like an item title or a page title, yes, you want that on there. But you don't have to like go and like actually write stuff in. Just get the feel and layout of the page, do a couple for each page, each route, basically. Just watch how complicated you get. So things really important to note, if you're using a navigation bar, you're going to want to make sure to call out where that's going to be on the page and include it on every page. Any super important content, so like I said, title, image, headlines, if you have columns set up, if you're using a specific piece of Bootstrap or want to use a specific Bootstrap piece, make sure you call that out. Anything that's interactive or a mouse over, so if you use any JavaScript to do options or something of that nature, make sure you call that out. And then each level of drop or pull hamburger elements. So like if I have those drop downs I showed you on the eTrailer site, I would want a post-it note, or I would want some way of calling that out to say, this is what actually lives there. So I know when I build that, what actually goes there. And so this basically is going to complement and help you write more user stories by saying, these are the things I need on each page. Where do they go? How do they all fit together? How do I build them? This again is also why I said, hey, get your hello world done, because now you're going to have somewhere to put these wireframes. So I'm going to demo with the expense tracker demo project. You guys haven't seen these. They are linked in the prep work for each class. And they lead you to pages to their GitHub so you can actually see, hey, this is where I go. And so you can come in here and you can actually see their little demo wireframes for the event, for the tracker, and kind of review what they look like. We're going to get to those later because those are event tracker, and I'm going to have you guys try some out. So basically, on the expense tracker, it was an app, one of the demo apps that is for tracking the expenses of somebody. So let's just say we're going to do a, let's just say we're going to do add new expense. The top of the page, we're going to list out what the route is. So expenses, add. I notice I am contradicting myself because I said, hey, use pen and paper. I'm using Google Draw. I couldn't figure out how to display a piece of paper on my desktop for you guys to see. So sorry for mixed things here, but if you do want to use Google Draw, it's a good tool. It's super easy. It's available through drive.google.com. So you can actually kind of follow along with it. So first things first, diving into building this page is that we're going to add an expense. So we need a box that just is where we're going to put it. It is really helpful to always label these things. So labeling Google Draw is just a double click. So go input expense value. A text box here, and we're going to say expense value. Then we kind of know these two go together. So now we have an expense value where we're going to actually put the input in. Let's grab out another one. We're going to say description. I'm going to drag out and say, put out another shape, another box, real easy. Just go description of expense. Be consistent. Line those guys up. And then we're going to tag it as a credit or an expense. Oops. And I promise I can drive this thing tonight. I'm going to say credit expense. I'm going to mark it as a dropdown, so I'm going to get a little arrow here to pull it out. Just say this drops out and then has these options of credit expense. And then we're going to fix it because that drives me nuts when stuff looks like that. And then we're going to include one more button. And because this thing does something, We're going to go ahead and draw it first. It's going to say submit. And since we're going to do something with it, we're going to give it a different color just to call out that, hey, it does something. There we go. That's a wireframe. I mean, as you can read all of these crazy books, you can dive into all this stuff about it, but that's a wireframe. Is just a hand-drawn, or in this case, quickly drawn together version of the page that says, this is where this goes together. This is where this goes. This is where this lives. If you want to get fancy, you can take in notes about it and just give it a border and say, using table to line up without messing with Bootstrap. You can call out different elements of what your page is going to do, or if you're going to have anything crazy on there, you can just call it out and give it a border, say, hey, this is the thing we want on this, but nothing that, you know, you don't have to go crazy and like have a working prototype. Let me grab some of these questions because there are some good ones here. So if you have used a tool, so I see people mentioning Plant UML, which is a pretty good one, Xmind, which also is a different one that works pretty well, Wireframe CC, and Balsamic. Any of those that you use, you'll want to either save it as an image, or you'll want to print it, or use your print dialog to print it out as a PDF and then submit that. So if you use any other website like that, you can use basically just a PDF to submit it. So if you're using this, Google Drive actually has save as PDF or save to Google Drive. So I hit save to PDF. I can save with my color, save it, slap that in my my Git directory for the class, push it up to my GitHub, and there you go, easy as pie. So yeah, all those sites should have something like that to let you kind of have access to that. Let's see, Brent, so the arrow represents the dropdown as selections, correct? Yes. So basically, we're just calling out in this box, it's going to be a dropdown with this. If you want to not confuse yourself like I just did, you can write dropdown on your arrow. So it's called out and says, hey, we're going to put a dropdown here with this stuff in it. Dropdown, how would you specify the difference between dropdowns or radios? Pretty easy. I would go in, and if I'm doing something like this, personally, I would just draw radios, but you can use little buttons like that and shrink them down so they're not half the page. Then just call out credit. There's a useful little button there. Expense like that. And then that's the other nice thing about using like a piece of paper or Google Draw. You can literally just add or take away some of those other ones, like get really picky about only having one set of elements or something. So that's kind of why I like this, and I like paper because it's free form. You can kind of do whatever you need to communicate your idea. If you actually do end up using notebook paper, make sure you take a picture with your phone and then email that to yourself, or use your webcam, hold it up, get a picture of it. Either works to go ahead and just make sure that you get it to your GitHub so you can upload it. So that is that. Any questions on this before I move on into the distance?
You had mentioned you did drop downs and then pull and hamburger. I'm not familiar with pull or hamburger.
Oh, okay. That's a good point. Those are weird ones. So drop down is obviously drop down. Pull is there are some JavaScript elements where you actually, when you mouse over, if you just click on it, it does one thing, and then if you kind of flick your mouse across it or you drag, I mention it because some people are being cool and doing mobile apps. If you're going to click it, slide it, or manipulate it in some way, that's a pull out. So it's just a really super specific version of an element. Hamburger is a really weird one. Not a lot of people surprisingly know hamburger, and I'm always surprised. Hamburger represents a menu that looks like, gotta think if I have one. Burger.
Google Drive, I think, uses one.
Google Drive does use one, yeah. I don't want to go out of my drive. This is a hamburger symbol. I didn't know it was called a hamburger. I actually called this a stack, but it's technically called a hamburger. So when you click on a hamburger, it's usually used in mobile development, but it pops out a menu when you click on it. So this has a picture of Gmail. That's actually a really good example. So it's more common on mobile. Some websites do use it. This is an example of a site that uses it. This is a crafting tool for a video game that I play a lot. But when you pop this in, it actually comes into this little sidebar, and that hamburgers, technically. So I click on one, it gives me a pop out. So those are hamburgers. Really quick example.
Great.
Yeah, it's kind of niche. But they show up, like I said, they're more of a mobile element than a desktop one. So oops, come back here. There you go. All right. So I'm going to ask you guys to try some out. And then before we get too far into doing this and really send you guys out on your own. So I'm going to leave the slide up here for a couple of minutes. Go ahead and just on your notes or your piece of paper, just scribble one out, and I'll go through these real quick. Just so you guys kind of get an idea of what it looks like. So these are coming from the user story. So what'll happen is you'll have your user story. You can wireframe for the user story. But then like, as you're drawing the wireframe out, you're gonna notice that you're gonna think of things drawing it out that you hadn't thought of prior to actually having drawn it. So you'll generate user stories from the wireframe or use the wireframe to generate a story. So take a minute when you guys get into your groups, go ahead and do these. I notice I'm running behind where I wanted to be. Kind of sketch these out together, get an idea of what goes where, how these kind of work before you start it on your own, just so you have some practice at them. They look like this. This is the first one, which is the login page with link to registration. Just to give you an idea, this is as simple as they can be. They can be like this, they can be like this, they can be crazy, hyper-developed ones as well, where they're actually working prototypes. Any is good as long as you get the idea of what you're doing. So that is the basics of wireframing. It's real easy. Just want to make sure you guys had a chance to see it and kind of play around with some of it before we move on. Before I jump onto a different topic, any questions about wireframing or user experience?
So where does wireframing come in the sequence of creation or design or whatever? Like, are you creating a Trello board with user stories first and then start doing wireframe, or is the wireframe like one of the first things that you should do when you're looking at something new?
Either. We're following curriculum here, so we're wireframing after we've set up our board. So for our process, you build the Trello board, you start with some user stories, use those to generate your wireframes, and then in the process of doing those wireframes, you're going to come up with stuff to then turn back into user stories on your board. Some people end up differently. Programming is a very creative science. So, people have different processes. Some people need that wireframe before they can even think about what's going to happen. So we're following a specific process. Some people may go other ways.
It's kind of co-creative, like either one can inform the other.
Mm-hmm. Co-creative, that's a good word. I'm going to have to remember that. It's a good descriptor of it. So I only know how to put the words on the page. I don't know what they are. All right, we're going to take a bit of a detour here and talk about data modeling, which is a specific kind of wireframing that you may not have thought of. The reason we're calling this out as its own section is because as you get into this project, one of the things we've seen is that people get really, really lost on how does my project fit together. Data modeling is basically doing a wireframe for your database. There's also its whole own field of stuff. So if you really, really like enforcing rules and like checking things and really squeezing the most efficiency out of something, this is a great field to get into. I loved working with the data modeling team as a project manager because they were a lot of fun and they really took off on their own. with very little input from me, so they were great for a variety of reasons. Basically, the discipline is looking at the relationship between objects in a program. You, you're looking for the what uses when, or what uses what, when, and how. And then basically the interactions between stuff. So if we're using this example as a supplier shipment item product relationship, so like we're a big middleman manufacturer shipper, we're looking at an order coming in, we're going to fill it from here. How do those things relate to each other? So kind of we have the data model here is pretty basic. We have a customer that submits an order that consists of items. Those items comprise products. And those products also contain items in and of themselves, so they kind of show up twice. We know what supplier gives us those items, and then the supplier sends those items via shipment back to the customer. And that's the data model, is how do these things interact with each other? That's, of course, the quick and dirty 5,000 feet version, but that's what you're looking to think about. This really helps you visualize the back end. I talked about my project, and I had the kind of the clothes trading website for parents, and when I added in toys and books, it got a little complicated. So if I had data modeled beforehand, I'd have known that that I would want to leave room for my listing item or my listing object to actually include the ability to grow into this other things, and would have built that first off. So that's why I want to get into this. Just take a second, think about how things are related to each other. How do they work together? Is there anything in particular that they need to breathe or live? And it also prevents you from repeating yourself. Nothing's worse than getting 6 weeks in and realizing you have 3 tag objects. So you gotta then untangle which one is the actual tag object I'm using here. So it's pretty useful. I mentioned in the field, they kind of do data checks. They check for compliance, PCI, stuff of that nature, where they're looking for the data to be valid and safe in the setting that it's from. So I encourage you to try it out. Make it just a model of what you're thinking your items are going to be in your app. Your objects, I'm sorry, are going to be in your app. Think about if there's any issues you didn't think about just by talking it out. See how they relate. If anything breaks, if you do it, if there's anything that can be combined into a single class and then used as a super class for the other objects to inherit from, it'll save you time, save you brain effort, if you're able to write a lot of this stuff ahead of time. So again, super quick overview of something that's helpful. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns about this topic? All right. So we're going to get in the meat of stuff, of one of my favorite topics, agility and Scrum. This is what I do for a living. So I'm going to try and finish this in 30 minutes, not keep you guys over, but this is the thing that I love. And what I really got excited about programming with was how this back end of Scrum and agility and running a project from start to finish works. So first things first, Scrum is a piece of a larger thing called Agile, which is a philosophy of work. It's kind of funny because Agile is a super big buzzword. Companies love to shout at developers, "Oh, I'm Agile. Oh, we're Agile. Come work for us. We're a super Agile shop." And then it's secretly like 1990 still when you actually get there and work there. So Agile is really a framework philosophy that puts people and what they're building for other people at the forefront of it. This is a document that I suggest you guys read last week called the Agile Manifesto. It is very simple. This is what Agile is. People will tell you all of these other things, and they make a lot of money telling people what Agile is. This is what Agile is. Start to finish, the whole philosophy is we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we've come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. That is, while there's value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. The real core of this philosophy is let's listen to what's happening, let's prepare to be ready to change, and let's make sure that when we do change, that we're able to build something that really answers that need. So we encourage people to learn and look into Agile as launch code because this is a very common philosophy of work, and it is one of the better ways of doing technology. Best is a horrible word to use in Agile. Anybody tells you there's a best Agile practice, they're lying to you. So the most common framework is called Scrum, which is literally based off of rugby. They call the big pile where they're all around the ball a Scrum, and this is kind of the philosophy that they borrowed from to build the Scrum framework. I'm going to show you this thing, and then we're going to get into each individual piece of it. But this is how the process works. If you notice, this actually matches up to our Kanban boards a little bit. We have that backlog, we have that the wish list, the backlog, the to-do list, the stuff that's actually in progress, and then the done column, all there inside of it. And this is a specific way of doing it. So this is a specific way that a larger group that's not just one person does it. We are getting into this because you're going to run into Scrum out in the real world. You're not going to really Scrum here outside of the daily stand-up, and a few of the we're borrowing a few of the things. So we do a retrospective, we do the sprint planning, we do the daily stand-up in kind of abbreviated forms, but just so you guys are aware of what the stuff means when you get out there. So I really recommend you guys check out scrumguides.org and really read through the Scrum guide because I'm going to fly through this like crazy and like you guys are used to me doing because there's a lot here. And honestly, you guys don't need to know that much because you'll learn a lot more from actually being out there and doing it than you will from me blathering at you guys about how it works. So Scrum is a framework that solves medium complexity problems where there is a lot known, but there's a lot still unknown. People try to apply Scrum as a silver bullet. It's not. What happens when you do that is that people start looking at metrics and why aren't we going fast enough and all this stuff that's just horrible and not the point of Scrum at all, because it's really a framework and a way of approaching work rather than any way of solving a huge problem you have. Scrum consists of ceremonies, roles, and artifacts. You've probably heard a lot of these things before or heard of these things prior, or I've mentioned them. The ceremonies are Scrum Daily Kickoff, Scrum Kickoff, a daily Scrum, a sprint demo, and a retrospective. And the roles are Scrum Master, Product Owner, Stakeholder, and Development Team. These work together in certain ways to produce things called artifacts, which are the actual user stories, the backlog, and then the iteration, which is that final working piece of product that we're looking to give to our customers in the end. So the roles are divided kind of by internal and external roles. The internal role is the development team, which is the actual developers, and then the Scrum Master, which is what I do at my work, either an extra person tacked onto the team, or actually one of the people of the team just leading the Scrum stuff. The development team's job is to get the work done. They have no other job. They do nothing else. They get the thing done. The Scrum Master helps insulate the team from outside influence. So basically, I run interference all day, every day. That's all I do. I keep my team running without letting them get dragged off by a person leaning on their desk and going, "Hey, Bob, can you do this for me?" No, we don't do that. So my job is to keep that from happening. The Scrum Master and the development team produce a set of artifacts called the sprint backlog, which is a to-do list for the next sprint, and then a product iteration, which is the actual physical working piece of software that comes out at the end of the sprint. Externally, there's two roles called the product owner and the stakeholder. Product owner is kind of the Scrum Master's counterpart that gives the interpretation of what the stakeholder wants back to the Scrum Master so that they can help the team build it. The stakeholder asks for a thing and then stays out of the way. It's kind of the key thing here, as if you notice, is that there's this insulation between business and work. And the reason for that is that work tends to get slowed down by people wanting to do business things. So they are kept separate for that reason. The product owner and stakeholder work together to create a backlog and feedback. So backlog is that kind of wish list of stuff that we sort of know that we want to do and we'd love to do, but we haven't really figured out what that actually means to do it. And they feed that down through to the Scrum team, and those things out of the backlog gets pulled into the sprint backlog or to-do list and then worked on during the sprint. Just mentioned all these, but the iteration is the working thing. The product owner and the stakeholder determine if that iteration is going to go out the door. The iteration provides increasing value over time. A great example of this is if we were asking for a car or something to go. If I hand you a skateboard, it's not what I wanted, but it's the thing that works. Then the next iteration, I hand you a skateboard, but it's got a pair of handlebars attached. That's improvement. It's increased value. So on and so forth. And we can keep going until it's got an engine, it's got sides, it's got a roof, all of that, and it's actually convertible now instead of just a skateboard. That's an iteration, is that it's iterating up and becoming more and more useful the longer and longer we work with it. The longer and longer we work on it also meets the needs better, because during each one of those times we show you, hey, here's this thing. You can tell me, well, what is it that you want to make this better? The iteration also is the point of feedback, the point from which feedback returns from the stakeholders. So they see it, they don't like it, they can tell you that, and then you can actually make changes rather than following a plan all the way through to the end and it being horrible because you guys haven't talked in 6 weeks. Sprint backlog artifact, as mentioned, it's the to-do column. The additional piece to it is called a sprint goal. So basically with the product owner, scrum master, and development team in a kickoff, you come up with a sprint goal, say, this is the thing we're going to try and build. This is the stuff we're going to add this iteration. Then you pull the stories based on that. And then the product backlog is the last artifact, and it's all incomplete stories that aren't part of the sprint backlog, and it is prioritized by, we need this thing, this thing, this thing, this thing, so on and so forth. So we've talked a little bit about this stuff, kind of ad hoc through the Kanban process, but this is what those words mean that I sprayed out at you guys last week. Ceremony-wise, so ceremonies are these things that we do to keep cadence or time box, which we're going to talk about time box here in a second, but they are things that we do to stay on track. So it's 4 of them. If you notice, this whole process is by 4s, which makes it super easy to remember. Pardon me. The sprint kickoff is kind of what we did last week with picking your stories, figuring out where you're going to go, giving yourself a target, and then pulling out all of the stories that you need. It has another piece called estimation that we didn't really get into. We estimate how difficult a story is going to be. I'll end up talking about that in week 5, just because lots of stuff to get through, and I know I always go over. The daily scrum, which is what you guys sort of did last week, where you introduced yourselves, and then this week you're going to actually be able to do a daily scrum. And basically you answer 3 questions. What did I do since the last time we met? What am I going to do for the next time we meet? And what is stopping me from getting those things done? And that's the scrum. It's 15 minutes, usually every day. If you're in a really slow environment like I am with database administrators, it's 2 or 3 times a week. But that's all it is you answer those 3 questions, everybody in the group, and then you break off and then start work. The sprint demo comes at the end. It's equivalent to when we do our project review. We get feedback from our mentors and stakeholders, show the current iteration and any new additions we've added, and prove that we met the goal we set for ourselves at the start of the sprint. And then the last piece is called the retrospective, which is the hardest part of Scrum, in my opinion. It is a meeting where you talk about how your process went, not what each person did, but how the team as a whole did in the process that we followed to get there. So you kind of, some of the questions I asked in the survey for the class are retrospective questions. What's the thing you would recommend that we work better on? What's something the instructor can do to better present the information? Those things are also the sort of things we'd ask in a retrospective of, how did we do with the process? How did I present the information to you guys? How can I improve that next time? Where were we successful at? What part was the most useful to you? What part was the least useful to you? All of these things kind of go into that retrospective of how do we improve and what are we going to do to improve for this next time around. Final piece of Scrum is called time boxing. I mentioned that a lot of things have a certain amount of time they're supposed to occur in. Time boxing is the discipline by which we stick to those time boxes, and a large part of the Scrum Master's job is saying, we are over time, we're done. That's why I start promptly at 6 o'clock and then get really mad at myself when I go over 7. It's because we are trying to hit this time box of 1 hour. So the Scrum Master enforces those things, keep things on time, and then keep the meetings valuable and predictable. Nobody likes being in a meeting that all of a sudden goes for 3 hours. Same goes for Scrum. It's 15 minutes for the daily Scrum, 2 hours for the sprint planning, 2 hours for the review, and 1 hour for the retrospective. No questions asked, everybody knows, and then somebody says, hey, we're done at the end. This also appears in a thing called Pomodoro that I'll talk about a little later on. That is a way of managing your actual work time. But same idea of having specific time boxes to work through. So all that said, and I know that was super fast, and holy cow, do I move. So JRC, you mentioned calling ceremonies meeting hell. I'm going to actually talk about that here in a second since you said something, but I'll come back to it. Vision. So the process, as you saw, this is how it all works together, is you have those ceremonies that move things from point A to point B to where we have eventually a workable, usable piece of product by saying we're going to spend only so much time, we're going to do the best we can in that time, and we're going to really dig in and make sure that everything works as best that we can in that time. So I burned through a massive field of study and work. Before I dive into talking about ceremonies and why they're not meeting hell, anybody have any other questions, comments, or concerns about the very, very quick explanation of Scrum? And again, I really stress go look at the Scrum guide because I'm going to dig into one of the ceremonies every week from here on out, but I'm going fast I know I'm going fast to get this through to you guys.
I was a little confused during the reading on Scrum about the stakeholder. Is the stakeholder a customer, or is the stakeholder someone within the development group?
Yes.
I think that's how you answer all my questions.
Well, you bring up a good point. Both questions, yeah, you have brought up a good point, is that there's some flexibility there. So a stakeholder can literally be a person in the development group or in the development team. If, for instance, it's a small company, your CEO very well may be working on it with you, and they're the person you're responsible to building this product for. And so they're both a stakeholder and a development team member. Ideally not. Ideally, the CEO is off doing CEO stuff, but that's a thing that can happen in a smaller company. If you're in a large company and that happens, you got some other problems. But in general, they can be. It's preferred if they're not. And that actually goes for all of the roles. The stakeholders can be the product owner. It's preferred that they're not. The product owner can be the Scrum Master. That's what I do at my job, is both of those roles. It's really preferred that we're not, but the way that we found our teams work, it's better if that is preferred by both. That is one of the biggest things about Scrum, and I really don't like that I've glazed over the retrospective so much, is that in the retrospective, you're going to talk about these things and go, oh, wait, we don't really need this extra person. John isn't doing anything. As the product owner, because he's busy doing stakeholder stuff, maybe we should pull the product owner stuff off of him, give it to our Scrum Master, and then let John go be a stakeholder and do what he needs to do to keep the business running. And that's the point. That's why you talk about the process at the end, or talk about how you're doing in the process at the end, is because you have to talk about those things to get better, to make your business better, to make your code better. Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns about this? I know I flew through this and it's a lot to take in, as everything in my lectures are.
Are the Scrum team and the development team basically the same thing?
Yes. They are, the Scrum team is, sorry, they are mostly comprised, the Scrum team is mostly comprised of the development team. Scrum team represents Scrum Master plus development team.
So in the reading, it seems like they used it interchangeably, kind of.
People do.
Okay.
One of the things that gets on my nerves is when people call the daily Scrum a daily stand-up. It's like, no, it's a Scrum. It's not a stand-up. That's a philosophy thing. If you use the right words, that's how you actually initiate change, rather than calling things the same thing we've always called them. All right, is the retrospective at the end of the project or after each sprint, or more often? It is, retrospective is as often as it needs to happen. By the guide and the base model, it is at the end of every sprint after the sprint review has happened. All of these things happen every single time. What's the difference between daily stand-up and daily Scrum? Forrest, honestly, that's a lot of personal opinion. So when you get into talking about the stuff, usually when people are trying to do Scrum, they're transitioning from a different style of work called waterfall, or extreme programming or something, and they'll try to pull those words over. And the reason I personally am so, you have to use the right word, is because if we're not making those words and saying those words differently and behaving differently, we have not actually changed. If we're doing a daily scrum, but we're calling it a stand-up, we're always going to be doing the same things we were doing when we were doing stand-up. By changing the language, we change the way we interact with our surroundings. So that's why I'm really hardcore about say daily scrum, not daily stand-up, is because when you're transitioning, you have to make that mental break of we're doing something different now. Okay, I'm going to put my soapbox away. Yeah, it is. And again, Agile is mostly philosophy. So I can harp and hem and cry and go blue in the face to my teams at work about this stuff. If they still call it a daily stand-up 2 years into this, erg. But when I've gotten them to call it a scrum, when I've gotten them to call it a program meeting, and that is different from what we were doing before, the meetings have gone better. They have been more what we're looking for. So that's why I personally am like, you got to do it this way. All right, I'm going to run out of time if I'm not careful. So let me jump quickly to why ceremonies are not meeting hell. So this is, it sounds like a lot. So each one of these larger meetings, so this kickoff, the sprint review, and the retrospective, only occur once per sprint. So a sprint is a time box of 2 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks, and kickoff happens at the start for 2 hours, retrospective happens at the end for 2 hours, or for 1 hour, and then the demo happens for 2 hours prior to the retrospective. That's it, that's all that happens. And then every day, when you do your daily scrum, it is 15 minutes. I will cut people off I will cut people off mid-sentence. It's like, guys, we're at 15 minutes, we're done. And then just close the Skype call out. Because that's how important it is to stay on time, because I don't want to waste your time as a scrum master. And I'm trying to hold to this philosophy of we only have so much time every day, and I don't want to keep you from doing your work. So those time boxes are important. Even though there were one slide where I went over them really fast, it is very important that you say, we're done, we're at 15 minutes, end of it. Otherwise, you get people like me that take 3 hours to talk through their stuff. And, all right, any questions before I move into my last section? Or any more questions I should ask? Chewy is a good example of pull. That's a good point, Brent. I did not think of Chewy. Chewy does some cool stuff on their site. So chewy.com, check it out. Does a lot of neat stuff on their site with their UI and finding the correct stuff. Megan makes a good point too. There's team size that plays into it. I have 35 people. So we don't always get a 15-minute stand-up, but I do try my best to be like 15 minutes, go, who's got the biggest stuff? So it depends, really depends. So do good facilitation, yes. Allie adds, it's literally the best quality though. We have 20 some odd people on a half an hour stand up, and that's only possible due to good facilitation. Been on teams with 3 people that last 45. My data modelers had that problem too. I had 5 people, routine hour-and-a-half stand up if I was not paying attention. So that's a point of the time box, is so that you don't lose that hour and a half to what should have taken 15 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into our last section here. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about the daily scrum. For the next 4 classes, I will be talking about each one of these a little more in depth. So you guys do have an idea of what you're supposed to do with these when you get out into the field. So goal of the daily scrum, we're trying to expose issues and problems, build accountability and trust, and identify opportunities to swarm and work together. It is not a status update. I get my DBAs really mad at me because they'll try and status update me, and I'm like, no. How are you doing? That's the question. It's not where's your project at? We can ask that later, but it's not a status update. It's how are you doing with the work that's been given to you. Build accountability and trust is really big on the daily scrum. So if I come to the scrum and say, I haven't done anything in the last 24 hours, I haven't done anything the last week, oh man, wait for the guilt. It will hit you like a brick. That's the point, is that we're trying to get you not accountable to the business, but accountable to the other people on the team. Keenan, I'm going to come back to that idea of what happens when somebody's not pulling their weight here in a second, but there are things that happen when that happen because, man, I'm not going to have to say anything because I bet that person's going to feel bad about themselves way before I ever have to say anything. So as I mentioned, you'll answer the 3 questions. What have you done since the last Scrum? What are you going to do before the next Scrum? And what's stopping you from meeting your goals? Really, the answer is simple as, so for my work, when we do our Scrum governance stuff, I say, since the last time we met, I've talked to 25 of our conductors and found out what they thought about the TPM Guild, which is a separate guild that covers the same area. Guild being a big organization of people that do the same job. And got what they thought. Between now and the next one, I'm going to talk to another 25, and I'm going to put this all into a report for you guys that that kind of explains what it is that we're doing, what it is that people feel about this process. And right now, what's stopping me is I'm having a lot of trouble getting in contact with people from Australia, and that's a stand-up. That is your stand-up answer, real quick, in, out, done. If the Scrum Master needs to ask questions, he can, but he should wait until the end of the stand-up. And that's the whole thing. Like it's people get super into like getting all technical about, well, how do you run as a good stand-up and all that. Now it's that's as simple as it is. You don't have to make it any more complicated. The format does the work for you. What happens when someone is not pulling their weight? If someone is not pulling their weight, it starts with a conversation between that person and the Scrum Master. Scrum Master goes, hey, I've noticed you have a lot of problems. You haven't gotten, or you're having a lot of trouble getting things done. How can I help? It's not you're in trouble. It's always, how can I help you do better? And I really encourage you guys when you're in the field, ask that question rather than what's wrong with you, what's stopping you. Go, how can I help you accomplish what you need to accomplish? And then that usually fixes it. Like a lot of times it's, especially now, it's like I'm having trouble getting work from home going. I'm having trouble keeping my kids away. How do I work with, a 3-year-old that wants to sit in my lap all day and do all this complicated DBA stuff when they slam the keyboard and delete all China? How do I do that stuff? And then that's the conversation you want to have with those people is, how do I break up things that are in your way so that you can do better? If it gets worse, then it kind of goes back into the normal managerial flow. Like as insulated as we try to keep the team, yes, they still report to somebody. Yes, there's still a review process. Yes, there's still all these other business things happening. But to start, it's that conversation of how can I help? So Keenan, does that help you kind of understand what to do or what happens there? All right, cool. Here's, I kind of threw these in here just so you know what the titles are for Scrum and Agility. If any of you are interested, even though I went through this super fast. Scrum Master, Product Owner, Agile Release Manager, Agile Release Train Engineer, Agile Coach, Project Manager, Advocate are all example of job titles. My job title at MasterCard for these roles is Technical Program Manager. There's also Program Manager Technical, which is surprisingly a completely different job. Service Master is our dedicated team level guy. Program Owner is kind of our assistant program manager, and then Agile Release Train Engineer, which Release Train Engineer is referencing a thing called SAFe, which is the kind of how do I take 9 Scrum teams and get them all to work together on the same project. And you basically do this process, but each team Scrum Master represents one person in a Scrum. It's amazing how it just scales up like that. So now that I'm through all of this, any questions, comments, or concerns on anything I went over very quickly in this topic? All right. With that, I actually reached the end of my stuff. Sorry, Emily, I almost went by there and started talking about stuff. Is someone a full-time Scrum Master for one team or many? It really depends on the business. So at MasterCard, we don't have any full-time Scrum Masters for single teams. It's very rare. Most of us have 2 or 3 teams. In a lot of other businesses, that's also true, is that there's usually one person for like 3 teams, and then you get pulled in a bunch of different directions. There are some companies, and I think they're more agile than other companies that have one-to-one relationships, Scrum Master to development team, but those usually are developers that also perform the Scrum Master role for that team, rather than a dedicated person like myself. Okay. All right. As far as cool stuff to read, if you're interested in this stuff, Want to see more? There's an episode of Magic School Bus Rides Again called Ready, Set, Fail that actually goes into the engineering process, and they go through iterations. They only have so long to do it. So it reflects what Scrum looks like in person. So if you have little kids, it's a fun one to watch with them because the new Magic School Bus is a lot of fun. Or if you want to dig into a bigger book about Agile and how to use things to shake stuff up in the workplace, I recommend The Agile Samurai by Jonathan Remison, and then I mentioned earlier on in the slides the Don't Make Me Think by Stephen Krug. So that is all I have tonight, guys. Right on time. Figured I'd actually give you guys some time back versus last week. So any other questions, comments, concerns, go ahead and let me know via Slack or during my office hours on Friday from 2 to 5. I will be adding some office hours this coming week on Sunday mornings because 2 to 5 on a Friday afternoon is not great for a lot of people. So again, thank you guys. Have fun in your mentor groups, and we will see you next week.